Pacho, and my presentation will be about the life of Sojourner Truth and how our assigned readings can be compared to it. Hope you enjoy! So this is my first slide, her early life. Sojourner Truth was born a slave in 1792 in New York. She was born with the name Isabella Baumfree. At 9 years old, she was sold to John Neely for $100 after her previous owner died. Along with her came a flock of sheep, and then 2 years later she was sold for $105 to Martinus Sherver. About 2 years later, she was sold again to John Drummond for $175. If you look to the right of this picture, you will see a photo of her memorial located in Florence, Michigan. So the way I connected this reading was from the vernacular tradition. I compared this to her early life because she didn't have these vernacular times. She was way too busy. She was working for one, she was being sold. She didn't have this singing and dancing and all this that everyone else had. She was being sold to men who wanted her on their slave farms. I also related this to what was said on page 6. Uh, According to Webster's second edition, the term comes from the Latin vernaculus, born in one's house; native, a slave, born in his master's house; native. So I related this to her or compared it to her because she wasn't a native. She was taken from place to place. She was never in a set home, and she was never where she was from. She was born in New York and traveled all over. She moved back to New York with her son, but that's later on. So that was her early life. Relevant themes that I found in the text, more specifically in the talking book section, was all about slavery. African Americans were not human beings. That was a part of the preface section. Sojourner Truth represented these slaves, and she also represented the women, how truly unfair and rude she was treated throughout her life. In 1850, she was married. She was forced to marry one of Dumont's other slaves and ended up having 5 other children with him. I just put myself in her shoes and can't imagine marrying someone that I didn't want to marry. She escaped with her youngest child in 1826, so several years later. Her youngest child's name was Sophia, and she left because her owner, Dumont, refused to fulfill his promise of freeing Truth and her family. So then 2 years later, she returned to Dumont's property to find her son, Peter, her eldest son. When she came back, she found out that he had been illegally sold. She took Dumont to court, and she was the first black woman to challenge a white man in court and come out successfully. So I just think of that, and I think that that's amazing and a great accomplishment and just a huge start to all of her successes. And looking back, if it weren't for her, there would be still so many women afraid to step up, and who knows who would have started this chain of taking a white man to court and being successful about it. I'd also like to point out that being a slave is hard in general. Being a woman and a slave is even worse, and having the courage to step up and to escape and to leave her kids behind is something I would never wish upon anybody. Coming from page 83 in the Norton Anthology Book, Volume 1, The Literature of Slavery and Freedom. Precipitating the narrator's decision to escape was some sort of personal crisis, such as a sale of a loved one, or a dark night of the soul in which hope contends with despair for the spirit of the slave. Sojourner did something that many were scared to do, like I said in the previous slide, and she left her children, which is even more difficult, and no one understands that type of pain of leaving your children because you're trying to better yourself and one of them. But she did come back, and she did try to save the rest of them. So Sojourner and Peter moved to New York, her son, after she escaped, and that's where she got her job as a domestic servant for a man named Elijah Pearson. So around 1832, she began working as a domestic servant for Robert Matthews too. So she was working for Elijah and she was working for Robert, which, being a domestic servant, isn't much different than a slave. You get a little more freedom, but it's not much better. So Robert Matthews murdered Elijah Pearson, And after he did so, he accused Truth about he accused Truth of murder, that she was involved with it and that she helped him. And so Truth went against them, and she ended up winning a slander Truth against Matthews and Folgers, who both accused her. So around 1843, she changed her name from Isabella to Sojourner for abolitionist purposes. She wanted to be someone that black women looked to for help and that could look up to. And I think when she was choosing a name, this was the name she wanted to represent herself. Abolitionist. According to the book, Phyllis Wheatley was also an abolitionist, and she was concerned. She was considered an African genius. She was very good at writing her words down, and Truth was good at speaking them. So, after traveling to the East Coast and meeting fellow abolitionists, Sojourner began giving speeches about how awful slavery was and how much she wanted it to end and how human beings shouldn't be treated that way. So she shared many stories of her life and what it was like to be a woman and a slave. So those are two different things that you have to hold: being a slave and being a woman, which in this time you weren't treated fairly by being either one. In 1850, she ended up publishing the narrative of Sojourner Truth, a Northern slave. This was huge because she told her stories, she told her experiences, what she was going through, everything, and everyone got to read how awful it was. Truth attended the first Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851. This is where she gave her famous speech, Ain't I a Woman speech. I provided this to show all of the emotion and how around that time what she was feeling in her speeches. She related her life and made you feel appreciated for all of those other women and slaves and what they had been going through. She talked about how men don't think that women need to be helped and just how she's treated so unfairly and how this idea of slavery is such a bad thing. And it says, if you look towards the bottom, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had turned the world upside down all along. These women together ought to be able to turn it back. So what she's saying is that yes, God created the world, but he created Adam and Eve, and Eve was a huge part of all of the mistakes. But since men can't change it and aren't fixing it, then why can't women have a shot at it? And I think that's huge because women have insights that men don't have, and men have the right to have their insights, but no one has the right to kick women out and say that they can't say what they want. So this is why she's saying, ain't I a woman, as in I am someone who can have a voice too. Sojourner moved to her new home in Battle Creek. This is where she plans to live the rest of her life, with the exceptions of traveling and going to abolitionism, women's rights, and political equality rallies or gatherings. So if you look at this picture, it's her monument in Battle Creek, and there are quotes behind it that she said, and they kind of give her a large figure and show how much power she really had and how down to earth she was, and all she wanted was freedom and equality and just to support women. So really appreciate this picture and this monument, because I know for a fact that I would want to go see it, but even just seeing a picture, you can see truly how much a picture can speak a million words. Moving to Battle Creek, she went to Washington, D.C. to help work with the Freedmen's Bureau and create ways for freed slaves to have successful life and career paths. She was protecting their rights as citizens by protesting segregation. Congress rejected her proposal to give freed slaves access to land in the West. She was trying to help them have an easier way into life. So being controlled and having to work your entire life on a farm, and then all of a sudden being freed and having to live in the real world is very hard. And so she wanted to create a plan that would allow them to have easy access to things and to, like, now we can go and, like, we can have our resumes and we can get experience and we can do all of this and then we can get a job. Well, they didn't have that. Their only experience was labor work. And when you have that and you're a black slave with no rights before, it's really hard to, like, confirm those rights after you're free. So that's what she was trying to help with. And so she came up with this proposal to Congress to give freed slaves land in the West, but they rejected her, so these slaves didn't have the opportunity to farm and to grow crops and stuff like that. Ruth was a delegate in the first Women's Right Convention in 1848 in Rochester, New York. So this was basically, if you picture a rally of a bunch of women coming together, and it was, as you can see on the sign, on this corner in Rochester, New York, but she was a delegate, so she spoke, she gave speeches, and she basically rallied all these women together to fight for women's rights. 2 years, she traveled around Michigan giving speeches about temperance, and she fought against capital punishment. Sojourner Truth ended up passing away May 23, 1883, in her home in Battle Creek. So if you look to the left in this picture, Sojourner Truth, renowned lecturer and reformer who championed anti-slavery rights of women and freedmen, rests here. Beside her lie two of her 5 children, Elizabeth Banks, Diana Corbin, and 2 grandsons, Samuel Banks and William Boyd. So, and this to the right is her house where she passed away. So I think this is a good summary of what she was known for: anti-slavery, rights of women and freedmen. She was loved. She was someone people wanted to be around. She held so much power in her presence, and just having this sign for her shows how much she truly meant to people. So I hope you guys learned a lot and about how great of a person she was and how important she is to our history. Thanks for watching.